More now on the link between processed meats and cancer. Let's go right to the source. I'm joined now from the French city of Lyon by Dr. Kurt Straif. You oversaw this report for the IARC, the cancer agency of the World Health Organization. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Dr. Straif, I think the first thing that went through many people's minds when they heard about this report was, oh no, another thing I like that I can't have. Is your report telling us to cut out processed meats entirely?
Well, our report shows that after having reviewed all the literature on the topic that has been published in more than 20 years, there is a clear link between consumption of processed meat and colorectal cancer. And at the same time, this is an evaluation saying, yes, we know it's causing cancer, but we also need to take into account how big is the risk. And there is somewhat better news. The risk is not very strong, like for tobacco smoking or asbestos and other exposures, but there is a clear link. And so there is also an association between the amount you eat and the risk. So the more you eat, the higher the risk. So certainly if you want to do something, you can reduce your consumption.
What about the kinds of processed meat? Is there a difference between, say, a handcrafted sausage made by a local butcher and bologna you might buy at a supermarket?
Well, there are more than 800 studies that have looked into that. And despite the clear link between the processed meat and the cancer risk, it was impossible from these data to clearly identify some subtypes of either processed meat or where the meat was grown or other contaminants in the meat. So the evaluation is clearly for the processed meat in general, with so far no clear evidence on where it comes from.
There has been criticism of your study. I'm sure you've heard it already, especially from meat producers, the livestock industry. They say these statistics need to be interpreted very carefully. What do you have to say to them?
Well, it has been interpreted very carefully by a group of world's leading experts on the topic that don't have any links to the meat industry or to advocacy groups. Though there is a fair and careful evaluation of more than 800 studies published, and the evidence stands up.
Tell us a bit more about how you did these studies and where in the world people perhaps eat more processed meat than they should be.
Well, this is a regular monograph of the IARC Monographs program, and we typically prepare for this for at least a year by identifying the best experts in the world, making sure that they don't have any conflicts of interest, then preparing for the 8 days meeting here in Lyon, preparing first working drafts, reviewing the working drafts within the working group, having conference calls, and then during the 8 days meeting, we finalize the documents and discuss what the evaluation would be. And in terms of your other question, there are big variations in the amount of red meat or processed meat consumed around the world. But in principle, it is the more you eat, the higher the risk is. So even if you only eat small amounts, you have some increased risk to somebody who eats less or doesn't eat meat.
So you talk about and you differentiate in this report between processed meat and red meat. Talk to us a bit more about that. And if you had to choose, which one would you choose?
Well, in terms of your choice, we know now in terms of the strength of the evidence that there is clear evidence linking the processed meat to at least one type of cancer in humans. There's also some evidence for a link with stomach cancer, whereas for the red meat, that is at the moment probably carcinogenic. There is also a strong link, but not yet conclusive, for the colorectal cancer and additional evidence for at least 2 other cancer sites. We need to keep in mind that evidence evolves over time. So some 50 years ago, when it was established that tobacco smoking causes lung cancer, nobody thought of the other 20 cancer types that are now firmly linked with tobacco smoking. So we see what's known now, and this is clearer evidence in terms of the strength of the evidence for the processed meat than for the red meat. And the quantity, the risk increase by amount consumed is about 18% per 50 grams of processed meat and about 17% per 100 grams of red meat. So I think if you would have to choose, probably it's safer to reduce your processed meat consumption, but perhaps also start thinking about reducing your red meat consumption.
Just very briefly to finish up, Dr. Straif, have you yourself cut back on your meat consumption since this report came out?
Well, the report came out only very recently, but I had already followed many of the dietary recommendations to reduce red meat and processed meat and better eat more vegetables and fruits and have a balanced diet.
Well, advice for us all. Thank you so much for that, Dr. Straif, head of the IARC Monographs program that oversaw that report on the link between processed meats and cancer. Thanks for taking the time to speak to us.